Sun Wukong's origin story begins in the most extraordinary of circumstances, a tale steeped in magic, nature, and an ancient prophecy. It begins in the faraway land of the Mountain of Flowers and Fruit, a mystical place hidden deep within the folds of the earth. The mountain was unlike any other, home to an array of beautiful creatures and lush forests, where the sun shone with golden light, and the air was thick with the scent of fruit blossoms. It was here, at the peak of this sacred mountain, that a mysterious rock lay, long untouched by time or the elements. The rock had been struck by a bolt of lightning, and for centuries it sat, watching the world change around it, untouched by man, god, or beast. It was a symbol of timelessness, an anomaly in an ever-changing world. One day, the heavens stirred as a great celestial event occurred, a phenomenon that had never been seen before. The rock cracked open in response to the celestial forces, revealing an ancient force of nature. From the heart of the rock, a monkey was born, emerging into the world in a shower of light and energy. His skin shone with an ethereal golden hue, and his eyes glowed with the same intensity as the very heavens above. The first breath he took was one of absolute clarity, and as he stood up, he felt an instant connection to the world around him, the earth beneath his feet, the air around him, the sun overhead. All seemed to hum in perfect harmony with his spirit. He was no ordinary being. He was destined for greatness, though he had yet to know it. The monkeys of the Mountain of Flowers and Fruit immediately took notice of the newcomer. They were a tribe of lively, playful creatures who lived in peace, free from the worries of the world outside. The mountain was their home, and it was here that they found joy and solace. When they saw the newborn monkey, they marveled at his strange and majestic appearance. His fur was golden, his movements graceful and swift, and his eyes sparkled with a wisdom beyond his years. They knew instinctively that he was special. The elders of the tribe, old and wise, approached him with reverence, and they took him into their fold, raising him as one of their own. They named him Sun Wukong, a name that would echo through the ages. Though Sun Wukong was raised among these monkeys, there was always something different about him. While the others reveled in their carefree lives, he was driven by an inner restlessness. From a young age, Sun Wukong felt a deep yearning to understand the world, to seek wisdom beyond the natural boundaries of his mountain home. The peace of the mountain, with its flowing streams and fragrant blossoms, could no longer satisfy his curious mind. He looked to the heavens and wondered what lay beyond the clouds. His gaze often lingered on the vast sky, filled with stars and cosmic mysteries, as he pondered the secrets of the universe. He knew there was something greater than the world he knew, something far more profound. This thirst for knowledge led him on a journey beyond the familiar shores of the Mountain of Flowers and Fruit. Sun Wukong ventured deep into the forests and across rivers, seeking answers to the questions that plagued him. One day, he encountered a Taoist sage who, after observing the monkey's relentless curiosity and sharp intelligence, recognized his potential. The sage, seeing the purity and raw power within Sun Wukong, decided to take him as a student. This meeting marked the first step in Sun Wukong's long path toward mastery and immortality. Under the sage's guidance, Sun Wukong began his rigorous studies in the ways of Taoism. The ancient texts he was taught were filled with profound wisdom, secrets of nature, the cosmos, and the human soul. He learned of the 5 elements, the yin and yang, and the balance that governed all things. But Sun Wukong was not content with simply absorbing knowledge. He sought to unlock the mysteries of the universe for himself. His mastery over the Taoist teachings grew, and soon he was learning to manipulate the elements around him with ease. His mind expanded, and he began to see the world not as it was, but as it could be, full of untapped potential and infinite possibilities. As his studies progressed, Sun Wukong was introduced to the powerful art of immortality. He learned of elixirs that could grant eternal life, of rituals that could protect the body and soul from decay, and of methods to transcend the limitations of mortal existence. His desire for immortality became all-consuming, and he began to experiment with the esoteric teachings. He immersed himself in alchemy, working tirelessly to unlock the secrets of the universe and achieve the ultimate goal, eternal life. Through sheer determination and willpower, Sun Wukong succeeded. He drank the elixir, performed the rites, and became immortal. His body was no longer subject to the ravages of time, and his soul was bound to the eternal cycle of the heavens. But even with his newfound immortality, Sun Wukong felt incomplete. He had attained what many sought their entire lives. Yet there was still a restlessness within him. The peace of the mountains, the wisdom of the sages, and the immortality he had gained had not quelled the burning desire to explore, to conquer, and to rise above. It was this hunger for more that eventually led Sun Wukong down a path of arrogance and pride. No longer content with simply being a powerful immortal, he sought greater recognition. He yearned for a title, position among the gods themselves. Sun Wukong's ambition grew, and his youthful innocence gave way to a sense of superiority. He began to believe that he was invincible, untouchable, perhaps even greater than the gods themselves. The peace and tranquility that once defined his character were replaced by an insatiable drive for power and respect. Thus began the turning point in Sun Wukong's story, the moment when the natural world and the wisdom he had gained would no longer be enough. He would soon seek recognition from the heavens themselves, a move that would set in motion a series of events that would forever alter his fate. But even as his ego expanded, there was still a quiet part of Sun Wukong that remembered his humble beginnings. He was still the monkey born from a rock, from a bolt of lightning, with a destiny that had been written in the stars long before he understood its meaning. In this stillness, Sun Wukong's rebellion against the heavens began, not with a loud declaration, but with a subtle shift within him. It was the start of something immense, and yet it began as all things in the natural world do, with a quiet spark that would soon grow into an unstoppable force. As the journey of Sun Wukong continues, it becomes clear that his story is not just one of rebellion and power, but also of self-discovery. In the depths of his arrogance, he will learn that true strength lies not in defiance, but in humility. And the world he once sought to conquer may offer him the very wisdom he had been searching for all along. As Sun Wukong matured, so did his understanding of the world. He had gained immense power through his training in Taoism and his study of the ancient arts of immortality. Yet there was an undeniable emptiness in his heart, a quiet yearning for something more. The journey he had undertaken had opened his eyes to the boundless possibilities of the world, and as much as he had achieved, it felt as though the more he learned, the more he realized how much there was still to uncover. Despite all the wisdom he had acquired, there remained a deep hunger within him, an unquenchable thirst for something beyond the teachings and practices that had shaped his life thus far. This hunger led him to seek greater answers that could only be found by challenging the very limits of existence. It was this inner unrest that propelled him toward an even deeper quest. He began to hear whispers of a power beyond immortality, something far greater than mere physical or spiritual strength. These whispers spoke of the Tao of the universe, the true source of all things, the essence of existence itself. It was said that the key to ultimate power lay in understanding the very nature of the cosmos, to master the forces that governed not only the physical world, but the very fabric of reality itself. To gain such knowledge would not only make him immortal in body, but truly eternal in spirit. In his search for this elusive power, Sun Wukong's travels took him beyond the familiar reaches of the mountain of flowers and fruit. He ventured through deep forests and crossed vast rivers, seeking out those who might hold the knowledge he sought. His path led him to the farthest corners of the world, where he encountered sages, immortals, and wise beings who had mastered the deepest secrets of existence. These figures, both human and divine, recognized the hunger in his eyes, and though many of them were reluctant to share their wisdom, Sun Wukong's persistence and determination wore them down. It was during this period that Sun Wukong came across the great Taoist immortal Subodhi. Subodhi was an ancient and wise being, known throughout the realms for his unparalleled knowledge of the cosmos. He had lived for eons, his existence spanning countless ages, and he had studied the nature of reality in ways that few could even comprehend. The Taoist sage lived in a peaceful retreat, isolated from the chaos of the world, seeking only to understand the deeper truths of life. Subodhi's home was nestled in the heart of the sacred mountains, where the air was thick with the scent of incense, and the landscape seemed to echo with the wisdom of the ages. Sun Wukong was drawn to the sage, sensing that he was the one who could answer the questions that had been haunting him. The meeting between Sun Wukong and Subodhi was not one of immediate trust, for the Taoist sage had learned to be wary of those who sought power. Yet, as he observed Sun Wukong's fervent desire for knowledge, he saw a unique spark in the young monkey, a potential unlike any he had encountered before. He saw the same restlessness and yearning for understanding that had once driven him on his own path of discovery. Subodhi recognized that Sun Wukong was not merely seeking power for power's sake, but that he was seeking something deeper, something that could only be understood by transcending the limitations of the material world. Subodhi agreed to take Sun Wukong under his wing, and thus began a new chapter in the Monkey King's journey. The lessons Sun Wukong learned from Subodhi were not simple or easy. They were complex and abstract, requiring the monkey to relinquish his previous notions of power and control. The Taoist sage taught him that true mastery of the universe lay not in conquering it, but in understanding and aligning oneself with it. Sun Wukong was taught to look beyond the surface of things, to see the underlying principles that governed all existence. He learned of the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, and how they interacted to create the balance of the world. He was shown the intricate dance between the forces of creation and destruction, the ebb and flow of life and death. But the most profound lesson Sun Wukong learned from Subodhi was the concept of non-attachment, the idea that true power came not from possessing or controlling things, but from releasing one's grip on them. This was a difficult lesson for Sun Wukong, whose entire existence had been shaped by the desire to possess and control. But through Subodhi's teachings, the Monkey King began to understand that the greatest power lay in the ability to let go, to transcend the ego, and embrace the flow of life itself. As the years passed, Sun Wukong's mind expanded, and his understanding of the universe grew deeper. His magical abilities became even more refined, and he learned to manipulate the elements with ease. He gained the ability to transform himself into any shape or form, to travel vast distances in the blink of an eye, and to command the very forces of nature. He became a master of the Taoist arts, wielding powers that could rival those of the gods themselves. His body was no longer bound by the limitations of mortality, and he achieved a level of enlightenment that few could even dream of. However, despite his newfound knowledge and abilities, Sun Wukong was not content. He had come to understand the deeper truths of the universe. But the thirst for power remained. He had learned the ways of immortality and the Tao, but he was still restless. There was a part of him that felt that even the mastery of the Tao was not enough, that there was something more that he could achieve, something greater than immortality itself. This restlessness continued to gnaw at him, urging him to seek even higher truths, higher powers. It was during this time that Sun Wukong's arrogance began to take root. He began to believe that his newfound knowledge and power made him equal to, if not greater than, the gods themselves. He had mastered the secrets of the universe. And yet, in his mind, he was still an outcast, a mere monkey in the eyes of the celestial beings. Sun Wukong's sense of superiority grew, and with it, his desire for recognition. He felt that the gods had long overlooked him, and that it was time for him to claim his place among them. His desire for recognition led him to the Emperor of Heaven, Jade Emperor, who ruled over all the gods and celestial beings. The Jade Emperor was the supreme ruler of the heavens, and his authority was unquestioned. Sun Wukong, now filled with pride and arrogance, demanded that he be given a position in the heavenly court. He wanted a title, a place among the gods, to be recognized for his achievements and power. The Jade Emperor, though initially amused by the audacity of the monkey, was wary of granting him such a request. He knew that Sun Wukong was powerful, but he also knew that the monkey's pride and ambition could lead to disaster. Despite the emperor's hesitations, Sun Wukong's persistence wore him down. The Jade Emperor finally granted him a title, the Great Sage, equal to heaven. To the other gods, this was a somewhat insignificant position, but to Sun Wukong, it was a symbol of his newfound status. He felt that he had earned the right to be recognized, and for a time, this title satisfied his thirst for power. However, it was not long before the reality of his situation began to set in. Although he had gained the title he sought, he soon realized that the gods did not respect him as he had hoped. The immortals still saw him as a mere monkey, a creature beneath their notice. And so, Sun Wukong's dissatisfaction grew, as did his arrogance. In his heart, he began to feel that the title he had been granted was a mere mockery, a reflection of the gods' unwillingness to truly recognize his greatness. It was then that he began to grow resentful, and the seeds of rebellion were planted. The path to his eventual fall from grace had begun, not with a violent outburst or open defiance, but with a subtle shift in his heart. A shift from pride to resentment. It was this feeling that would drive him to challenge the very heavens themselves, leading to the events that would forever change his fate. Sun Wukong's story had only just begun, and the journey that lay ahead would test not only his strength and power, but his very understanding of who he was and what he truly sought in the world. The Monkey King was on the precipice of a new chapter in his life, one that would take him from the heights of celestial acclaim to the depths of rebellion, and ultimately to the discovery of his true nature. But for now, his quest for power and recognition remained the guiding force of his actions, as he moved ever closer to the fateful decision that would set him on a path of no return. Sun Wukong's journey into the realms of the divine did not end with his appointment as the great sage, equal to heaven. In fact, it was only the beginning of a more complex and dangerous path, one that would bring him face to face with forces far greater than himself. After receiving the title from the Jade Emperor, Sun Wukong initially believed he had finally reached the peak of his aspirations. But it did not take long for him to realize that the gods of heaven who occupied the highest positions in the celestial court, did not hold him in the esteem he felt he deserved. His title was no more than a formality, an empty gesture that failed to earn him the respect and admiration he had imagined. This disillusionment with his place in the heavenly hierarchy only fueled his growing arrogance. Sun Wukong, once a humble monkey born from a magical rock, now saw himself as an equal to the gods. He had mastered the Taoist arts, obtained immortality, and gained the wisdom of ancient sages. He had conquered the earthly realm and transcended death itself. And yet the immortals of the heavenly court continued to dismiss him as little more than a monkey. His pride began to swell, and it became clear to him that his aspirations could not be satisfied by a mere title. He needed something more, something that would finally prove his greatness to the heavens. It was in this state of dissatisfaction that Sun Wukong's path crossed with a new teacher, one whose wisdom and knowledge would be crucial in shaping the course of his future actions. This new master was Subodhi, a revered Taoist immortal who lived in a secluded and tranquil retreat high in the mountains, far from the distractions and politics of the celestial court. Subodhi was no ordinary sage. He had lived for eons, his wisdom vast and unparalleled, and his mastery of the Tao was beyond compare. It was said that Subodhi had learned the secrets of the universe, how the forces of nature intertwined, and how the universe itself was governed by the delicate balance of energy, light, and dark. When Sun Wukong first arrived at Subodhi's retreat, he was full of self-assurance and arrogance, convinced that he knew everything there was to know. However, the Taoist sage quickly saw through the Monkey King's facade and recognized that beneath his bravado lay a deep longing for something more. Subodhi understood that Sun Wukong's desire for power and recognition was rooted in an emptiness that no earthly or celestial title could fill. Despite his vast knowledge and skills, Sun Wukong was still searching for a purpose, something that would give his life meaning beyond the pursuit of dominance and control. Subodhi did not immediately teach Sun Wukong the profound lessons that would eventually lead to his transformation. Instead, he began with a series of tests, designed to challenge the Monkey King's arrogance and force him to confront his true self. These tests were not physical challenges, but mental and spiritual ones. Subodhi required Sun Wukong to meditate in silence for long periods, to contemplate the nature of existence, and to reflect on the impermanence of all things. At first, Sun Wukong found these exercises frustrating. His mind was restless, constantly seeking something to conquer or master. But Subodhi patiently guided him, teaching him that true power did not lie in domination or control, but in understanding and alignment with the natural order of the universe. Through these quiet moments of introspection, Sun Wukong began to see the world in a new light. He realized that his desire for recognition and power had blinded him to the deeper truths of existence. The celestial world, with all its grandeur and hierarchy, was just one small part of a much larger and more intricate web of life. The gods, for all their authority, were still bound by the same forces that governed the natural world. They too were subject to the laws of the Tao, and their power was not absolute. Subodhi's teachings opened Sun Wukong's eyes to the concept of balance, how every action, every thought, and every being played a role in maintaining the harmony of the cosmos. He learned that the key to true power was not to control or manipulate the world around him, but to understand and flow with its natural rhythms. Sun Wukong's mind, once clouded with the desire for supremacy, began to clear. He started to understand the interconnectedness of all things, how every creature, every element, every force in the universe was part of a grand design. His perspective shifted, and he came to see that his original desire to be recognized by the gods was a reflection of his own inner turmoil, and lack of understanding. But the greatest lesson that Sun Wukong learned from Subodhi was the concept of non-attachment. For much of his life, he had been driven by a desire to possess and control. He wanted to own his power, to make it his own, and to ensure that no one could take it from him. Yet, Subodhi taught him that true strength lay in the ability to let go, not to cling to anything, whether it be material possessions, power, or even one's own sense of self. Non-attachment was not about renouncing the world, but about living in harmony with it, free from the weight of attachment and ego. This teaching was a profound shift in Sun Wukong's thinking. It challenged everything he had believed about strength and success. For a being who had spent his life struggling to gain and hold on to power, the idea of letting go was both a terrifying and liberating thought. Subodhi's lessons took root in Sun Wukong's heart, and over time, he began to change. His arrogance began to fade, replaced by a deeper understanding of the Tao and the way of the universe. He saw that true immortality was not about physical endurance, but about transcending the ego and aligning oneself with the cosmic flow. Sun Wukong's powers grew even more formidable as he learned to manipulate the forces of nature with greater precision and control. His ability to transform into different shapes, to summon storms, and to command the elements reached new heights. Yet, despite his vast power, he became more humble, more centered, and more aware of the delicate balance between strength and wisdom. However, Sun Wukong's transformation was not without its challenges. His inner conflict between the old, prideful version of himself and the enlightened being he was becoming was a constant source of tension. He still had moments of doubt, moments when his old desires for recognition and control would resurface. But with Subodhi's guidance, he learned to recognize these impulses and to let them pass without acting on them. Over time, his mind grew calmer and his heart more peaceful. He began to understand that his true purpose was not to seek glory or domination, but to fulfill his role in the greater cosmic order. As Sun Wukong's training under Subodhi continued, he also began to grasp the deeper truths of the Tao. He understood that the universe was not static, but in a constant state of flux and transformation. Everything in existence, from the smallest blade of grass to the greatest celestial being, was part of this ongoing process of change. The Tao was not a force that could be controlled or manipulated, but something that had to be experienced and understood in its entirety. It was a journey, not a destination. The more Sun Wukong learned, the more he realized how little he truly knew, and how much there was still to discover. This sense of humility, born from his deepening understanding of the Tao, was the key to his eventual enlightenment. As Sun Wukong's powers and wisdom grew, he began to reflect on his earlier actions and the path that had brought him to this point. He saw the folly of his previous ambitions, the desire to prove himself to the gods, to be recognized and respected. He understood that his ego had clouded his judgment, and that true greatness was not about being admired by others, but about understanding oneself and one's place in the universe. The gods, he realized, were not his rivals. They were part of the same cosmic order that governed all things. His relationship with them was not one of competition, but of mutual existence. Sun Wukong's time with Subodhi was a turning point in his life, one that reshaped his destiny. The lessons he learned during his training would prepare him for the challenges ahead, including the inevitable confrontation with the celestial forces. Yet, despite his growing wisdom, there remained a sense of destiny that called to him, a sense that his journey was far from over. The path to true enlightenment was long and winding, and Sun Wukong was only just beginning to understand the depth of what lay ahead. The next chapter of his life would test his newfound knowledge and force him to confront the greatest challenge of all, the conflict between his ego and his destiny. Sun Wukong's journey to the heavens was marked by a deep sense of yearning and ambition, and it began with a simple desire to reach the heights of the celestial realms and claim his rightful place among the gods. Having achieved mastery over countless magical arts, including immortality itself, the Monkey King had grown restless. He had reached a point where the world of mortals, with its limitations and earthly concerns, could no longer contain him. His power, once unrivaled on the mountain of flowers and fruit, now felt small compared to the grandeur of the divine. There was a whisper inside him, urging him to aim higher, to reach for a realm where only the most revered beings resided. The heavens, with their mysterious aura and untouchable majesty, called to him like a distant melody, promising not just power, but the recognition he so desperately sought. It was not long before Sun Wukong set his sights on the gates of heaven itself. The heavens, as the supreme domain of the gods, were considered to be beyond the grasp of any mortal being. They were a realm of unimaginable beauty, vast and ethereal, where gods and immortals played out their roles in a cosmic dance of creation and destruction. From the mountain of flowers and fruit, Sun Wukong could see the glittering stars in the sky, and his heart ached to be a part of that celestial world. He knew that he was capable of more than what he had achieved on earth. His mind raced with thoughts of the status, respect, and honor that awaited him among the divine beings. He believed that his strength and wisdom had earned him a place in the divine court, and that it was only a matter of time before the gods recognized his true potential. As he prepared for his journey, Sun Wukong took great care in his preparations. He had long since mastered the art of transformation and had learned the ways of the Tao, but the journey to the heavens would be unlike anything he had ever experienced. The path was not simply one of physical distance, but also a mental and spiritual journey, a crossing of boundaries that would challenge not just his body, but his very essence. Sun Wukong knew that to reach the heavens, he would have to transcend his mortal origins and prove that he was more than just a monkey born from a stone. He needed to prove that his power and his ambition were worthy of the gods. As Sun Wukong ascended toward the celestial realms, he traveled through a landscape that seemed to shimmer with a divine light. The air was crisp and pure, filled with the scent of celestial flowers and the soft music of the spheres. The journey itself felt like a dream, as if he were floating through a world beyond time, where the laws of nature no longer applied. Each step he took brought him closer to the heavens, and with each step, his excitement grew. But beneath the excitement, there was also a sense of awe. The heavens were not a place of mere physical beauty. They were a realm imbued with ancient power, a place where even the most powerful beings were humbled by the sheer vastness of the cosmos. Sun Wukong, for all his strength and arrogance, could not help but feel the weight of the divine presence around him. When he finally reached the gates of heaven, Sun Wukong was struck by their magnificence. The gates were made of shimmering gold, adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to tell stories of the universe's creation and destruction. The air around them crackled with energy, and the very earth beneath his feet seemed to tremble in reverence to the divine realm. As he approached the gates, he felt a rush of exhilaration and fear, a mixture of triumph and uncertainty. He had come this far, but would the gods accept him? Would they welcome him as one of their own? Or would they cast him aside as just another arrogant mortal? The moment he stepped through the gates, Sun Wukong was greeted by a scene unlike anything he had ever imagined. The heavens were more beautiful and more grand than he could have ever dreamed. They were vast and endless, stretching out into infinity, filled with temples, palaces, and gardens of otherworldly beauty. The skies were a deep shade of blue, with clouds that glowed like cotton candy and stars that shone with a brilliance that seemed to outshine the sun. The air was heavy with the scent of incense, and the sounds of heavenly music drifted on the breeze. Everything about the heavens seemed perfect, as though they were a reflection of an idealized world, untouched by the struggles and imperfections of the mortal realm. However, despite the beauty and grandeur of the heavens, Sun Wukong quickly realized that his arrival was not met with the fanfare he had expected. The gods and immortals whom he had imagined would greet him with open arms barely took notice of his presence. He was just another figure among countless divine beings, none of whom seemed particularly impressed by his arrival. The gods moved about their business, engaged in their eternal duties, and Sun Wukong found himself standing at the edge of the divine court, feeling more like an intruder than an honored guest. The realization stung, but it only fueled his growing frustration. It was not long before Sun Wukong sought an audience with the Jade Emperor, the ruler of heaven. He had heard of the Jade Emperor's power and wisdom, and he believed that if anyone could recognize his greatness, it would be the Emperor. The Jade Emperor was seated upon a magnificent throne, surrounded by his retinue of divine ministers and officials. His palace, the grandest in all of heaven, was adorned with jewels and treasures that sparkled like the stars themselves. Despite the overwhelming beauty of the palace, there was a coldness to the scene. The emperor's gaze, though regal, was distant, as though he had seen it all before, and was unmoved by the grandeur surrounding him. When Sun Wukong approached the throne, he immediately demanded a position of respect in the celestial court. He insisted that he be given a title, a role befitting his power and abilities. He was no mere monkey, he argued, but a being of immense strength and wisdom, one who had conquered death itself and mastered the secrets of the Tao. He believed that the Jade Emperor would recognize his greatness and elevate him to a position of honor among the gods. The Emperor, however, was unmoved. He listened to Sun Wukong's demands with a detached expression, his eyes cold and calculating. The Jade Emperor, in his infinite wisdom, saw through Sun Wukong's arrogance. He recognized the Monkey King's power and potential, but also saw the dangers of his pride. The Emperor knew that Sun Wukong was not ready to join the celestial court. The gods, for all their power, operated within a strict hierarchy, a delicate balance of influence and authority that could not be easily disturbed. The gods were beings of order and stability, and Sun Wukong, with his rebellious nature and insatiable desire for recognition, did not fit into their carefully structured world. Instead of granting Sun Wukong a prominent position, the Jade Emperor offered him a humble role, a title that was meant to placate him without disrupting the balance of the heavens. He was made the keeper of the horses, a lowly position that involved tending to the Emperor's celestial steeds. To the Emperor, this was a way of testing Sun Wukong, offering him a position that would allow him to observe the workings of heaven, while also keeping him in check. It was a position of little significance, one that did not carry the honor or respect that Sun Wukong had expected. This decision, however, did not sit well with Sun Wukong. He was furious, humiliated by the title he had been given. The gods, who had once ignored him, now seemed to mock him with this paltry position. Sun Wukong, whose ego had once soared higher than the heavens themselves, was now forced into a position of menial labor. He could not fathom why the Jade Emperor would treat him this way. In his mind, he deserved more, far more, than to be a servant to the gods. His pride, already wounded, now turned to resentment. He had come to the heavens seeking glory, but instead he was met with disdain and condescension. The situation left Sun Wukong conflicted. On the one hand, he knew that he was powerful enough to challenge the gods themselves. On the other hand, he also understood the dangers of such a confrontation. He had learned much during his time with Subodhi, and he had gained a deeper understanding of the Tao and the forces that governed the universe. But despite this knowledge, his pride and arrogance still burned fiercely within him, urging him to rise above the gods and claim what he believed was rightfully his. The Monkey King's frustration continued to grow, and the seeds of rebellion began to take root deep within him. In the grand halls of heaven, amidst the grandeur and majesty of the divine realm, Sun Wukong's heart darkened. His dreams of being recognized as a god, of attaining the respect and honor he felt he deserved, had been dashed. The gods may have been immortal, but they had never known the struggles, the pain, and the ambition that had driven Sun Wukong to this point. He would show them that his power was not to be underestimated, and he would stop at nothing to prove that he too was worthy of being part of the divine order. And so, the stage was set for Sun Wukong's rebellion against the heavens, a rebellion that would shake the very foundations of the celestial world, and forever alter the course of his destiny. The Monkey King had come to the heavens in search of recognition and glory, but what he found was far more complex, a lesson in humility. In the midst of his deepening resentment toward the gods, Sun Wukong's thoughts turned dark and vindictive. The insult of being relegated to the position of keeper of the horses had been the final spark that set fire to his simmering anger. He had endured the mockery of his lowly status and was furious at the Jade Emperor's dismissal of him as a mere servant to Sun Wukong. It was not merely an issue of honor. It was a challenge to everything he had fought for, everything he had become. His pride, once a force of unstoppable ambition, now festered like a wound that refused to heal. He had come to heaven seeking recognition, hoping for a position that would confirm his place among the divine beings, but instead, he was given a role of insignificance. In his eyes, the gods were blind to his true worth, and this failure to see his greatness was an affront to everything he had achieved. For Sun Wukong, this was more than a personal slight. It was a divine betrayal. He had spent years honing his skills, mastering the Taoist arts, and attaining immortality. Yet when he sought the acknowledgement he believed he deserved, the heavens refused to grant it. He had thought that the divine realm would see his brilliance, his wisdom, his power, but instead it had cast him aside, relegating him to menial labor. The more he brooded over this injustice, the more he became consumed by the need to prove himself. He no longer desired mere recognition. No, he wanted the gods to see him as equal to them, perhaps even superior. The humiliation of his current status was unbearable, and it made his longing for revenge even stronger. Sun Wukong's thoughts turned toward a more radical course of action. His frustration led him to a single, inevitable conclusion. The heavens would never accept him unless he took his rightful place by force. The gods, for all their wisdom and power, had underestimated him, and he would make them pay for that mistake. He would show them that he was not just a monkey, not a mere mortal being from the mountain of flowers and fruit, but a force to be reckoned with. This idea, this need to prove himself, became his driving force. His mind, once open to learning and wisdom, was now fixated on a singular goal: revenge. Sun Wukong's anger was not simply an emotional reaction. It was a sharp and calculated fury, one that sprang from a deep well of dissatisfaction. He had been raised in a world where strength and cunning were the highest virtues. He had fought to prove himself from the moment he was born, and now he was faced with an obstacle far greater than anything he had encountered before: the entire celestial order. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the only way to achieve his goal of becoming a true god was to overthrow the very system that had denied him, to topple the celestial hierarchy, to tear down the Jade Emperor's court, and to take his place at the head of the divine realm was now his sole ambition. There was no room for compromise, no space for negotiation. He would either claim his place among the gods or destroy the heavens in the process. With this determination driving him, Sun Wukong began to make preparations for his rebellion. His first act of defiance was subtle, yet it would have profound consequences. He began to study the inner workings of the celestial court, watching the gods with a keen eye. He observed their patterns, their habits, and their weaknesses. In his years of training, Sun Wukong had learned the value of patience and precision, and he applied these lessons as he studied the celestial bureaucracy. The gods, it seemed, had grown complacent. They went about their duties with a sense of entitlement, never considering that a mere mortal, much less a monkey, could pose a real threat. This complacency, this overconfidence in their unassailable power, became the key to Sun Wukong's strategy. He began to use his magical abilities in increasingly bold ways, starting with small acts of disruption. He had mastered the art of transformation, and he used this to his advantage, slipping in and out of the celestial palace undetected, changing his form to blend into the crowd or to remain unseen. He also had the ability to summon and control the elements, and he used this power to create chaos in the heavens, disrupting the routines of the gods. These minor acts of rebellion went unnoticed at first, as the gods were too absorbed in their duties to pay attention to a lowly servant. But Sun Wukong knew that these small victories would build towards something much greater. They were only the beginning of his plan. The Monkey King knew that if he was to overthrow the celestial hierarchy, he needed to confront the Jade Emperor directly. The Emperor, sitting on his throne surrounded by ministers and divine officials, was the embodiment of the celestial order. To challenge the Jade Emperor was to challenge the entire structure of heaven itself. But Sun Wukong was no stranger to challenges. His entire life had been a series of tests of strength, of intelligence, of endurance. He had conquered death, defeated powerful foes, and outwitted the most cunning of immortals. He would face the greatest challenge of all, taking down the gods themselves. As the days passed, Sun Wukong's confidence grew. He had already disrupted the flow of celestial life, causing enough confusion and unrest among the gods to draw attention. But he knew that it would take more than small acts of defiance to bring about the downfall of the heavens. He needed to strike directly at the heart of the celestial court. To do so, he would need allies, beings who, like him, were discontent with their place in the divine order, beings who would be willing to join him in his rebellion. And so, Sun Wukong began to form an unlikely alliance with the lesser immortals and beings who had been similarly overlooked by the gods. He reached out to those who had been rejected, forgotten, or treated with disdain by the celestial order. These beings, though not as powerful as the gods, shared Sun Wukong's bitterness toward the heavenly hierarchy. Together, they formed a coalition, a ragtag army of misfits and outcasts who had grown tired of being marginalized. They all had one thing in common, a burning desire to overthrow the gods and create a new order, one in which they would no longer be ignored or trampled upon. With his new allies at his side, Sun Wukong's rebellion took shape. He began to assemble a formidable force, one that would strike fear into the hearts of the gods. His army of outcasts, though diverse and varied, shared the same goal: to tear down the heavens and replace them with a new order, one where they could all rise to their rightful place. Sun Wukong, now more than ever, was driven by the need for recognition and respect. He had always been an outsider, someone who had fought for everything he had achieved, and now he would fight to take the heavens themselves. The next step in his plan was to strike at the very core of heaven's power. The Jade Emperor's throne. With his army assembled, Sun Wukong launched his first full-scale attack on the celestial court. The heavens, so accustomed to peace and order, were ill-prepared for such a bold and unexpected move. The gods, in their arrogance, had never anticipated a rebellion from someone like Sun Wukong. They underestimated him, and that underestimation proved to be their greatest mistake. Sun Wukong's attack was swift and brutal. His magical powers, now owned to perfection, allowed him to break through the celestial defenses with ease. His transformations baffled the gods, and his control over the elements wreaked havoc on the heavens. The once immaculate gardens of heaven were scorched by fire. The palace walls shook under the force of his attacks, and the very sky seemed to tremble at his fury. Sun Wukong had unleashed the full force of his wrath, and there was no stopping him. As the rebellion raged on, the Jade Emperor was forced to confront the reality that his celestial court was no longer safe. He called upon his most powerful generals and immortals to put an end to the chaos, but they were no match for Sun Wukong and his growing army. The Monkey King had tapped into a power that was both physical and spiritual, one that allowed him to transcend the limitations of mere mortals and challenge the very foundation of the heavens. No one in the celestial court had ever faced a threat like this before. The gods, once confident in their invulnerability, now found themselves fighting for their survival. Wukong, with his unwavering determination and his unyielding belief in his own superiority, was determined to show them that their reign had come to an end. He had been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed for too long, and now it was time for him to claim the power that was rightfully his. At that moment, Sun Wukong knew that there was no turning back. His rebellion had gone beyond personal vengeance. It had become a crusade to reshape the heavens according to his vision, the vision where he would no longer be a mere servant, but a ruler. He was no longer just fighting for recognition. He was fighting for control, for dominion over the very heavens that had once rejected him. The battle had begun, and there was no stopping Sun Wukong now. As Sun Wukong's rebellion against the heavens unfolded, the celestial order began to crumble under the weight of his relentless assault. The Monkey King, armed with the knowledge and powers he had accumulated over years of training and self-discovery, was proving to be a far more formidable foe than anyone in the divine realm had anticipated. The gods, once secure in their unchallenged authority, found themselves scrambling to respond to this unexpected and unprecedented threat. Their world, which had been built on harmony and stability, was now being torn apart by the sheer force of Sun Wukong's rage and ambition. Sun Wukong's army, composed of those who had once been cast aside and forgotten by the celestial order, became an unstoppable force in the battle. His allies, beings who had been disrespected, overlooked, or outright oppressed by the gods, were fiercely loyal to him. They had long suffered under the weight of divine arrogance, and they saw in Sun Wukong not just a powerful leader, but a symbol of defiance. For them, his rebellion was more than a fight for power. It was a fight for recognition, for respect, and for justice. The Monkey King's anger mirrored their own frustrations, and they followed him with unwavering conviction. The celestial court, once an impenetrable fortress of divine authority, began to buckle under the weight of Sun Wukong's assault. His magical abilities were unmatched. His control over the elements, His ability to shapeshift into countless forms, and his speed and agility made him a virtually unstoppable force. He wreaked havoc across heaven, shattering its delicate balance and sowing chaos in every corner. The heavens, once pristine and orderly, were now filled with the sounds of battle. The clash of swords, the roar of storms, and the cries of gods and immortals alike. The very sky seemed to darken with the fury of the Monkey King's wrath. In the face of this growing chaos, the Jade Emperor, the supreme ruler of heaven, found himself in a difficult position. For all his wisdom and power, he had underestimated the depth of Sun Wukong's strength and determination. The Monkey King had not only mastered the arts of immortality, but had gained a profound understanding of the Tao. This understanding, combined with his innate powers, made him an enemy unlike any the gods had faced before. The Jade Emperor knew that his celestial court was on the brink of collapse, and he began to panic. He called upon his most trusted generals and powerful immortals to confront Sun Wukong and his army, but these attempts were futile. One by one, Sun Wukong's forces decimated the divine warriors sent to stop him. His magical transformations and his mastery over the elements were too powerful for any of the gods to contain. The rebellion had already begun to shift the very fabric of the divine realm. The gods, who had lived in peace and privilege for eons, were now confronted with the harsh reality that they were vulnerable. Their arrogance and complacency had blinded them to the potential dangers lurking beneath their tranquil existence. Sun Wukong, with his fury and resolve, had exposed the cracks in their seemingly invincible fortress. The rebellion was no longer just about the Monkey King seeking recognition. It was about something far deeper, the challenge to the very system of power that had governed the universe for countless ages. As the battle between Sun Wukong and the celestial forces escalated, the Jade Emperor began to realize that there was no easy solution to the problem. He knew that Sun Wukong's power was vast, and he could not simply fight fire with fire. The Monkey King was not only a physical threat, but a spiritual one as well. His rebellion was a challenge to the cosmic order itself, a test of the very forces that governed the universe. The Jade Emperor, ever wise but now facing an unprecedented crisis, began to search for a way to outmaneuver Sun Wukong. He knew that brute force alone would not defeat the Monkey King. Instead, he would have to rely on cunning and strategy. In his desperation, the Jade Emperor turned to the immortal beings who had long served him, beings of great power and wisdom who had mastered the most profound aspects of the Tao. These immortals were not warriors in the traditional sense, but they were beings of immense spiritual strength. The Jade Emperor hoped that by enlisting their help, he could find a way to subdue Sun Wukong without directly confronting him in battle. The celestial court, though shaken to its core, had one advantage. It had vast reserves of knowledge and power, much of which had been kept hidden from the lower ranks of the divine hierarchy. If anyone could outsmart the Monkey King, it was these ancient immortals. Among these immortals was a figure of great renown, one who was known for his wisdom and ability to perceive the hidden truths of the universe. This immortal was called Laozi, a being whose understanding of the Tao surpassed that of any other. Laozi was revered as the ultimate sage, and his insight into the mysteries of the universe was said to be unparalleled. The Jade Emperor summoned Laozi, hoping that his wisdom could provide a solution to the growing crisis. Laozi, calm and composed as always, agreed to intervene. He understood the gravity of the situation and saw the potential for Sun Wukong's rebellion to tear apart the fabric of the cosmos. Laozi's approach was not one of direct confrontation. Instead, he sought to engage with Sun Wukong on a deeper level through wisdom, not force. The immortal sage believed that Sun Wukong's rebellion was rooted in ignorance, not malice. The Monkey King, for all his power and cunning, had yet to fully understand the true nature of the universe. His arrogance and desire for recognition had blinded him to the higher truths that governed all things. Laozi knew that if Sun Wukong could be made to see the error of his ways, he might abandon his rebellion and return to a more harmonious existence. The challenge, then, was not to defeat the Monkey King, but to enlighten him. Meanwhile, Sun Wukong, consumed by his rage and pride, saw no reason to stop his rebellion. In his mind, he had been wronged by the gods, and the only way to fix the injustice was to completely overturn the celestial order. He no longer sought merely recognition. He now desired to reshape the very fabric of the heavens. His vision of the future was one in which the gods were dethroned, where power was distributed equally among all beings, and where he could rule over the cosmos as its rightful sovereign. The gods, who had long looked down on him, would now be forced to bow before him. His ambition was boundless, and there was nothing, in his mind, that could stop him. As the battle raged on, the Jade Emperor, with the help of Laozi and the other immortals, began to formulate a plan to subdue Sun Wukong without resorting to destruction. The celestial court knew that if they fought Sun Wukong directly, they would only escalate the conflict and risk bringing about even more chaos. Instead, they would use the Monkey King's own pride and ambition against him. They would attempt to outwit him, to appeal to his desire for recognition, and to convince him that the true path to greatness lay not in rebellion, but in cooperation with the divine order. Laozi, ever patient and wise, knew that Sun Wukong's heart was torn between his desire for power and his underlying yearning for purpose. The rebellion was not just about revenge, it was about Sun Wukong's search for meaning, for a sense of belonging in a universe that seemed to have rejected him. The Monkey King's defiance was born not from hatred, but from a deep and unresolved inner conflict. Laozi believed that if he could guide Sun Wukong to understand this conflict, the Monkey King might come to realize that his true path lay in surrendering his ego and accepting his place within the greater cosmic order. With this in mind, Laozi began to craft a plan to confront Sun Wukong. He knew that the Monkey King would not be swayed by mere words or promises. He would have to be shown the consequences of his rebellion, how his actions were not just causing harm to the celestial realm, but also to himself. Laozi's plan would be subtle and indirect, a carefully orchestrated series of events designed to lead Sun Wukong to the realization that the true path to power lay not in domination, but in balance and humility. The battle was far from over, and the gods would have to use all their wisdom and ingenuity to restore harmony to the heavens before the rebellion could bring about irreversible damage. In the grand halls of heaven, where the sounds of battle still echoed, a new strategy was being put into motion, one that would either bring Sun Wukong to his senses or break him completely. As the celestial court struggled to contain the growing rebellion sparked by Sun Wukong, it became clear that no simple solution would suffice to restore order. The gods had attempted to quell the Monkey King's fury with brute force, yet each strike seemed to only fan the flames of his rage. The celestial warriors sent to stop him were no match for his unmatched magical abilities, and every attempt to defeat him only made his resolve stronger. Sun Wukong, with his ever-growing ambition and a desire to prove his worth to the heavens, had become a formidable force of nature, one that seemed to be beyond the reach of the gods. The rebellion, which had begun as a personal vendetta for recognition and respect, had morphed into something far more dangerous, a direct challenge to the very foundation of heaven itself. The Jade Emperor, once confident in his reign, now found himself facing the harsh reality that the celestial realm was on the verge of collapse. His initial response had been one of dismay, followed by attempts to restore peace through his trusted generals and immortals. But none of them had succeeded in stopping Sun Wukong's relentless assault. The Monkey King's rebellion had gained momentum, and the celestial court could no longer ignore the extent of the threat. The gods, who had once been untouchable, were now vulnerable, and Sun Wukong's power was a testament to the fragility of their divine order. The Jade Emperor knew that he had to act quickly if he hoped to preserve the heavens and prevent them from being entirely upended by the Monkey King's fury. Yet, for all his wisdom, the Emperor could not simply defeat Sun Wukong through strength alone. The gods' collective power, no matter how vast, was being systematically undone by the Monkey King's strategic brilliance and relentless will. The key to stopping him, the Jade Emperor realized, was not to meet Sun Wukong in battle once more, but to find a way to outwit him, to strike at the core of his rebellion with something far more subtle and powerful than brute force. In his desperation, the Jade Emperor turned once again to the immortals and sages who had long served as advisors in the celestial court. These immortals, beings of immeasurable wisdom and spiritual power, had been largely unaffected by the rebellion thus far. They had observed Sun Wukong's actions from a distance, understanding that the Monkey King's rebellion was not merely an attempt to seize power, but a deeper struggle to find his true place in the universe. The Monkey King, for all his fury, was driven by a fundamental misunderstanding of the Tao, the natural order that governed the heavens, the earth, and all things in between. He had spent so much of his life seeking recognition, seeking to prove himself, that he had lost sight of the very balance that underpinned all existence. Among these immortals was a being of unparalleled spiritual depth, an ancient sage named Bodhidharma, who had long studied the profound mysteries of the universe and the Tao. Bodhidharma had been an observer of Sun Wukong's actions for some time, and he understood that the Monkey King's rebellion was rooted in a deep existential need, a desire to transcend his mortal origins and achieve a level of power and respect that could elevate him to a status far beyond what was offered in heaven. Bodhidharma, however, saw that Sun Wukong's desire to dominate and overthrow the divine order was misguided. The true path to power and enlightenment, Bodhidharma knew, lay not in rebellion, but in humility, balance, and understanding of one's place in the grand design of the universe. With this understanding in mind, Bodhidharma proposed a plan to the Jade Emperor, one that would seek to confront Sun Wukong not through force, but through wisdom and spiritual insight. The Monkey King's mind, Bodhidharma believed, had become clouded by his pride and anger. If Sun Wukong could be shown the futility of his rebellion and guided toward a deeper understanding of the Tao, there was hope that he would abandon his war against heaven and return to a more harmonious existence. Bodhidharma's approach would not be a simple matter of defeating Sun Wukong, but of confronting him on a spiritual level, appealing to his deeper sense of self and the inherent wisdom that lay dormant beneath his ego. The Jade Emperor, though initially skeptical, saw the wisdom in Bodhidharma's proposal. The rebellion had reached a point where conventional methods of warfare were no longer effective. Sun Wukong's immense power could not simply be overcome by force, and the gods had already shown that they were unable to outmatch him in battle. The Emperor realized that if the heavens were to be saved, they needed a new approach, one that would address the root cause of Sun Wukong's anger and rebellion. The celestial realm, for all its grandeur, had grown stagnant and complacent, and perhaps the Monkey King's rebellion was a wake-up call, a reminder that even the most powerful forces in the universe were subject to change. With Bodhidharma's guidance, the Jade Emperor devised a plan to engage Sun Wukong directly through a confrontation that would force the Monkey King to confront his inner turmoil and reassess his desires. This plan, however, would not be a direct battle. Instead, it would involve a series of encounters designed to strip away Sun Wukong's ego and expose the deeper, more vulnerable parts of his being. The Jade Emperor understood that Sun Wukong was not merely fighting for power. He was fighting for something far more elusive: his sense of purpose, his place in the world, and his quest for meaning. Bodhidharma began his approach by seeking an audience with Sun Wukong. The Monkey King, despite his arrogance and pride, had always been a seeker of knowledge, and Bodhidharma recognized this. Sun Wukong's thirst for power and recognition was rooted in a deeper sense of inadequacy, a belief that he was not truly respected by the divine realm, despite all he had accomplished. This insecurity, Bodhidharma believed, was the key to unlocking the Monkey King's mind and guiding him toward a higher understanding. When Bodhidharma approached Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, ever defiant, met him with suspicion. He had come to the heavens to challenge the gods, and now an immortal sage was attempting to reason with him. He was not interested in listening to the words of those who had once dismissed him, but Bodhidharma, with his calm demeanor and unshakable presence, did not seek to persuade Sun Wukong with arguments or logic. Instead, he spoke of the Tao, the natural flow of the universe, and the interconnectedness of all things. He spoke of the balance that existed in all things, of how the pursuit of power for its own sake was a futile endeavor that would only lead to destruction. At first, Sun Wukong was resistant. He had spent so much of his life fighting against the constraints of the mortal world and the limitations imposed upon him by the gods. He had risen to power through sheer will and defiance, and he could not fathom the idea of surrendering his ambition. But Bodhidharma's words resonated with something deep within him. The Monkey King, for all his power and pride, still carried the weight of loneliness and uncertainty. His quest for recognition had left him feeling hollow, and in that moment, he began to question whether his rebellion was truly the path to fulfillment. Over the course of several encounters, Bodhidharma continued to challenge Sun Wukong's beliefs, using his deep understanding of the Tao to guide him toward a new way of thinking. The process was not easy. Sun Wukong's pride was a formidable obstacle, and the Monkey King resisted every step of the way. But with each conversation, each lesson in humility, he began to glimpse a different truth, a truth that lay beyond his desire for domination and recognition. He began to see that true power did not lie in subjugating others, but in aligning oneself with the natural order of the universe. The Tao was not something to be controlled or conquered, but something to be understood and embraced. As Sun Wukong's mind opened to these new ideas, he found himself facing the hardest challenge of all: letting go of his ego. His entire life had been built on the foundation of self-assertion, of proving himself to others. The idea of surrendering that identity was terrifying. But with Bodhidharma's gentle guidance, Sun Wukong began to understand that his true path lay not in defiance, but in acceptance. He had spent so much time fighting against the world, against the gods, that he had forgotten the most important truth of all. The only way to find peace was to let go of the need for control. In that moment, Sun Wukong realized that his rebellion was not the path to greatness. It was a path that would only lead to destruction. The Monkey King, once so consumed by pride and ambition, now saw the futility of his actions. The gods had not disrespected him because of who he was, but because he had failed to understand the deeper truths of existence. He had been blinded by his own desires, and in doing so, he had forgotten the very balance that governed all things. With this realization came a profound shift in Sun Wukong's heart. He understood now that the true way to greatness was not through domination, but through humility and alignment with the Tao. He did not need the recognition of the gods. He needed only to understand his own place in the universe. And with that understanding, he began to see a new path, a path of peace, balance, and inner harmony. The rebellion that had once consumed him began to fade, replaced by a quiet wisdom that came from a deeper understanding of the world. The peace that followed Sun Wukong's realization was not immediate, nor without its challenges. For someone as headstrong and prideful as the Monkey King, the road to humility and inner balance was bound to be filled with internal conflict. The battle within himself was not merely about accepting a place within the celestial order, but also about relinquishing the anger, resentment, and sense of betrayal that had driven him to rebellion in the first place. To truly embrace the Tao and the natural order, he had to let go of everything that had defined him up to that point: his sense of superiority, his desire for recognition, and his thirst for vengeance against the gods who had dismissed him. Despite his profound revelation, Sun Wukong could not simply shed his pride overnight. He had spent centuries building his power, asserting his strength, and striving for recognition. His ego had been the very force that propelled him forward, and now he had to confront the reality that his past actions had been rooted in misunderstanding and misplaced ambition. The challenge lay not only in reconciling with the gods, but also in reconciling with himself. The Monkey King, despite his wisdom and newfound clarity, still felt the echoes of his former self, the warrior who had defied the heavens and sought to topple the divine order. These memories haunted him, serving as constant reminders of the person he had once been. He had to confront these memories, accept his past mistakes, and move forward in a way that aligned with the principles of the Tao. As he began to grapple with these deeper emotions, Sun Wukong sought solitude in the quiet corners of heaven, away from the bustling celestial courts and the ongoing political intrigues of the gods. It was in these moments of stillness that he found the space to truly reflect on his journey, to examine the choices that had brought him to this moment, and to understand the weight of the rebellion he had led. The more he meditated on his actions, the more he realized how deeply his pride had clouded his judgment. In his quest to be seen as equal to the gods, he had overlooked the true path to greatness, one of balance, humility, and harmony with the universe. One of the key lessons that Sun Wukong began to learn was the importance of letting go of attachment. The Tao, as he had come to understand it, was about flowing with the natural order of the universe, not forcing things to be as one wished. He had spent so long fighting against the flow, trying to carve out his own destiny according to his own desires, that he had ignored the deeper truth that true power lies in surrender, not in domination. The Tao teaches that everything is interconnected, and that the forces of the universe are in constant motion, flowing in and out of harmony. To align oneself with the Tao is to surrender to that flow, to recognize that control is an illusion, and that the most powerful way to exist is to move in harmony with all things. As Sun Wukong meditated on these truths, he began to feel the burden of his ego gradually lift. His once fiery ambition to overthrow the heavens began to cool, replaced by a deep sense of peace. But this peace was not something that came easily. It required constant effort, constant reminders to himself that his true path was not one of conquest but one of acceptance. The celestial order, for all its flaws, was still part of the great cosmic tapestry, and his place within it was part of a much larger, grander design. It was not long before Sun Wukong found himself once again before the Jade Emperor, the very being he had once sought to overthrow. But this time, the Monkey King was no longer filled with anger or resentment. He had come to realize that the rebellion he had waged was futile, not because he had been defeated, but because it had been born from a place of misunderstanding. The Jade Emperor, with all his wisdom, had never truly sought to humiliate Sun Wukong. The Monkey King's pride had led him to interpret the Emperor's actions as a personal slight, but in reality, the Emperor had only been trying to maintain order and balance in a world that could not be ruled by unchecked ambition. When Sun Wukong stood before the Jade Emperor now, it was not as an adversary, but as a humble being seeking redemption. His transformation was evident in the way he carried himself, no longer the arrogant and defiant figure that had once stormed into heaven demanding respect. He was calm, composed, and fully aware of his place in the world. The Jade Emperor, too, recognized this change, and though he had once been wary of the Monkey King's power, he saw the wisdom in Sun Wukong's new perspective. The rebellion had not only challenged the celestial order, but had also brought about a profound shift in Sun Wukong's understanding of himself and the universe. The Jade Emperor, wise as he was, saw that Sun Wukong had come to understand something that few beings, mortal or divine, ever truly grasped: the importance of balance. Sun Wukong's desire to rise above the gods and to claim his place in the heavens had been rooted in an imbalance, an ego-driven need for recognition that had distorted his perception of the world. But now, as he stood before the Emperor, the Monkey King had come to realize that true greatness was not achieved through dominance, but through alignment with the cosmic order, through the understanding that all beings, whether gods or mortals, had their place in the vast, interconnected web of existence. The Jade Emperor, ever perceptive, welcomed Sun Wukong's transformation with a sense of approval. He understood that the Monkey King had faced a journey unlike any other, one that had required him to confront not just the heavens, but his own deepest fears and desires. The Emperor, seeing the sincerity in Sun Wukong's heart, offered him a place in the celestial order. But this time, it was not as a ruler or a conqueror, but as a guardian of the Tao, a protector of balance and harmony. Sun Wukong's power, once so destructive, would now be used for the greater good of the universe. He would no longer fight against the heavens, but would work alongside them, ensuring that the balance of the cosmos remained intact. In this new role, Sun Wukong would become a symbol of redemption, a reminder that even the most rebellious and defiant souls could find their way back to the path of wisdom and harmony. His story would serve as an example to others who sought power for the wrong reasons, showing that true power comes not from domination, but from understanding and embracing one's place in the grand design. It was a humbling moment for Sun Wukong, but one that he had long been waiting for. The rebellion that had once defined him was now behind him, replaced by a deeper, more profound purpose. But Sun Wukong's transformation was not only about finding peace with the gods. It was also about finding peace within himself. The journey he had taken from a young, defiant monkey who sought to conquer heaven to a wise and humble being who understood the interconnectedness of all things had reshaped his very being. He had faced his greatest enemy, his own pride, his own need for control, and in doing so, he had discovered a power far greater than anything he had ever sought. This power was not external, but internal, a power that came from within, from aligning with the Tao and understanding that the greatest strength lies in surrendering to the flow of the universe. Sun Wukong's journey was far from over. While the rebellion had ended, his quest for enlightenment would continue. For true wisdom is not a destination, but a lifelong journey. And though he had found peace, he knew that his role in the cosmos was far from complete. The heavens would always be a place of order and balance. But as a guardian of the Tao, Sun Wukong's mission was to ensure that this balance was never disrupted again. His story was one of redemption and growth, a tale of a being who had once sought to destroy the heavens, but had ultimately found his true place within them. And in doing so, he became a symbol of the transformative power of humility, acceptance, and the understanding of one's role in the larger cosmic design. With this newfound wisdom, Sun Wukong embraced his new role, not as a conqueror, but as a protector of balance, aware that the true path to greatness was not in domination, but in harmony. Sun Wukong's new role as a guardian of the Tao was not one that could be easily embraced. Even though he had undergone a profound transformation, the remnants of his former self, the ambitious and proud monkey who had once rebelled against the heavens, were not so easily discarded. Every day, he found himself faced with the challenge of maintaining the peace he had fought so hard to establish. His immense power, which had once been wielded to fuel his rebellion, now needed to be channeled into something far more constructive. And though he had made peace with the gods, his relationship with them was complex, layered with both respect and the lingering traces of his former resentment. For Sun Wukong, the hardest part of this new role was understanding that his journey was not about achieving greatness by imposing his will on the universe, but about aligning himself with the flow of the Tao. This meant accepting that not everything could be controlled or bent to his desires. His powers, once used to assert dominance over the gods, had to be wielded in a way that maintained the delicate balance of the cosmos. He had been taught, in his many years of training and in his moments of reflection, that true strength did not come from force alone, but from wisdom, restraint, and a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. In this new phase of his life, Sun Wukong's purpose became one of observation and guidance, not conquest. He was now a protector, a figure who ensured that the balance of the world was upheld. He found himself walking a fine line, acting as a mediator between the celestial beings, the mortals, and the forces of nature. He was no longer the fiery rebel who had sought to overthrow heaven, but a figure who could provide counsel and insight to those who needed it most. It was a position of great responsibility, and one that required him to constantly check his own impulses. He had learned that while passion could fuel action, it was often the stillness that brought about true clarity. In the early days of his transformation, Sun Wukong struggled with the quieter aspects of this new life. He had been so used to the thrill of battle, the rush of overcoming obstacles, that the calmness of his new role seemed almost alien to him. The chaos and the noise of his rebellion had given his life meaning for so long, but now that he was tasked with restoring harmony, he had to learn how to find meaning in stillness. It was not easy. He found himself longing for the days when he had been the center of attention, when his every move had been a declaration of his power. In his new role, he was often unseen, working quietly behind the scenes to maintain the delicate balance of the universe. This invisibility was humbling, but also, in a way, freeing. He no longer needed to prove himself to the heavens or the mortals. His role was to be a guardian, not a ruler, and it was a lesson he had to internalize each day. In his moments of solitude, Sun Wukong often reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He thought about the rebellion, about the gods and immortals who had once looked down upon him. He thought about the years of hardship and training, the endless battles he had fought in the name of self-improvement, and the deep loneliness that had accompanied his quest for power. He had sought to be seen as more than just a monkey, more than just an outsider. But in the end, he had come to realize that the very thing he had longed for, recognition, was not the path to true fulfillment. It was only through self-acceptance, through understanding his place within the grand order of things, that he found the peace he had been searching for all along. As time passed, Sun Wukong's relationship with the gods began to shift. The gods, who had once viewed him as a threat, began to see him as a necessary part of the celestial order. His wisdom, gained through his rebellion and his eventual enlightenment, proved invaluable to them. Though they still retained their positions of power, they came to respect Sun Wukong not only for his strength but for his insight and understanding of the Tao. The Jade Emperor, once wary of the Monkey King, now saw him as a trusted advisor, someone who could offer perspectives that others might overlook. Sun Wukong, in turn, found that his role in the celestial court was not one of servitude, but of collaboration. He was not just a guardian of the Tao, he was a bridge between the gods and the mortals, ensuring that both realms were kept in balance. Despite the respect that he had earned, there remained an element of complexity in his relationship with the other immortals. Many still remembered him as the rebellious figure who had once stormed heaven, defying the established order and seeking to dethrone the gods. Some gods, particularly those who had witnessed his rebellion firsthand, struggled to fully trust him. They had seen his wrath, felt the force of his anger, and knew that his power could not be easily contained. Though they recognized his wisdom, there was still a lingering wariness in their eyes. Sun Wukong understood this distrust, but he also understood that it was part of his journey to prove, not through force, but through patience and consistent action, that he had truly changed. His past would always be a part of him, but he had learned to accept it, just as he had learned to accept his role in the universe. In his new life, Sun Wukong also found that his relationship with mortals had changed. No longer the trickster or the troublemaker, he had become a symbol of hope and redemption to those who had once feared or misunderstood him. Mortals, who had heard the stories of his rebellion, now looked to him as a figure of wisdom and guidance. He became a protector of the weak, a defender of balance, and an advocate for those who sought to understand the deeper truths of the universe. His encounters with mortals were not about asserting his power, but about sharing his knowledge and helping others find their own paths to enlightenment. Sun Wukong's interactions with the mortals were a reflection of his own internal growth. He had once seen them as insignificant, as mere pawns in the cosmic game, but now he understood that they too had their own place in the grand order. Mortals, with their fleeting lives and imperfect nature, were an essential part of the universe. They were the ones who lived with the constant challenge of finding meaning in a world that was often chaotic and uncertain. And it was through his interactions with them that Sun Wukong was able to deepen his understanding of the Tao. He saw in them the same struggles that he had once faced: the desire for recognition, the need for power, the search for meaning. In helping them, he found that he too was still learning, still growing. One of the most significant lessons that Sun Wukong came to understand was that true power did not lie in the ability to control others, but in the ability to control oneself. He had spent so many years trying to impose his will on the universe, to shape reality according to his desires. But he now realized that true strength came from the ability to let go of that need for control. It was a lesson that he had learned through his rebellion, through his defeat, and through his eventual enlightenment. The Tao was about surrendering to the natural flow of the universe, accepting that there were forces far greater than the self. To live in harmony with the Tao was to live without attachment, to understand that all things were in constant flux, and to find peace in the midst of that change. As Sun Wukong continued to serve as a guardian of the Tao, his life became one of balance. He was no longer the fiery rebel who sought to overthrow the heavens, but a figure of wisdom and restraint, guiding both gods and mortals toward a deeper understanding of the universe. His power was still immense, but it was now tempered with compassion and understanding. He had learned that greatness was not about asserting dominance, but about finding one's place within the grand design of existence. And though his journey had taken many twists and turns, it had ultimately brought him to a place of peace, a peace that was not born from the absence of conflict, but from the understanding that conflict, too, had its place in the cosmic order. In the end, Sun Wukong's story became one of redemption, a tale of a being who had once sought to conquer the heavens, but who ultimately found his true purpose in protecting the balance of the universe. His transformation was not just about power, but about the realization that true power lay not in dominance, but in surrender, in wisdom, and in understanding. Sun Wukong had learned to let go of his need for recognition and control, and in doing so, he had found a peace that transcended all ambition. His journey was a reminder that even the greatest of rebels can find their way to harmony, and that the true path to greatness lies not in rising above others, but in understanding and accepting the interconnectedness of all things. Sun Wukong's newfound peace and role as a guardian of the Tao brought about a profound shift in not just his relationship with the gods and mortals, but also in his very perception of the universe. The Monkey King, once so consumed by his own desires, was now slowly embracing the deeper wisdom of the Tao, the understanding that all things in the universe were interconnected, that every action had its ripple effect, and that true harmony could only be achieved by aligning oneself with the flow of the natural world. The once rebellious and defiant force of nature had been transformed into a figure of quiet wisdom and introspection. Yet, this transformation was not as simple as it might appear on the surface. Beneath the calm exterior of Sun Wukong was still a being who had endured much, who had fought for his place in a world that had never truly accepted him, and whose journey toward balance was still unfolding. The key to Sun Wukong's transformation lay not just in his role as a protector of the Tao, but in the deepening understanding that true strength was found in the ability to recognize and accept his flaws, his desires, and his past. His rebellion against the heavens had been born from a place of deep dissatisfaction, of feeling misunderstood and unappreciated by the divine forces that ruled the cosmos. This feeling of alienation had fueled his ambition to overthrow the heavens, to prove his worth not only to the gods but to the universe itself. And though that rebellion had been quelled, and his understanding had deepened, Sun Wukong could not escape the fact that his past actions still shaped his present identity. His journey toward balance, therefore, was not only about reconciling with the gods, but also about coming to terms with the parts of himself that had led him to the rebellion in the first place. In the early stages of his transformation, Sun Wukong had experienced moments of self-doubt and internal struggle. Even though he had come to understand the wisdom of the Tao and had accepted his role in the grand design of the universe, there were still lingering remnants of his old self, the proud and arrogant warrior who had fought tooth and nail for recognition. The process of shedding this part of himself was not easy. The desire to be seen, to be respected, was deeply ingrained in his psyche. After all, it had been that very desire that had driven him to seek immortality, to master the magical arts, and to defy the heavens. How could he now reconcile the need for power and recognition with the teachings of the Tao, which emphasized humility, selflessness, and the acceptance of the natural order? For Sun Wukong, this struggle took place on multiple levels. On one hand, he had come to understand that true greatness lay not in asserting one's will over others, but in the quiet wisdom of knowing one's place in the cosmos. Yet, on the other hand, there was still the burning desire for recognition that he had once pursued so fervently. The Tao taught him that the universe was vast and ever-changing, and that no single being could control it all. To live in harmony with the Tao was to surrender the ego, to let go of the need to dominate or control. But the remnants of his rebellion, the very drive that had pushed him to achieve greatness, clung to him like a shadow, reminding him of his past and urging him to assert his authority once more. This internal conflict was a key aspect of Sun Wukong's continued growth. It was not enough for him to simply reject his past actions. He had to confront them, understand them, and ultimately find peace with them. The rebellion had been a crucial part of his journey, a necessary chapter in his story. It had forced him to question the nature of power, to seek knowledge beyond the surface, and to challenge the very forces that governed the universe. And while it had ultimately led to conflict, suffering, and destruction, it had also led him to the profound realization that true power did not lie in domination, but in balance. As Sun Wukong continued to serve as a guardian of the Tao, his internal struggle became more nuanced. He found that the act of letting go of his ego was not something that could be accomplished in a single moment or through a single realization. It was a process, one that required constant self-awareness, mindfulness, and patience. Each day, he had to remind himself that his true strength lay not in his ability to bend the world to his will, but in his ability to work in harmony with it. And as he continued to grow in wisdom, he began to see that his role as a guardian was not just about preventing chaos, but about fostering understanding and connection. His purpose was to help others see the same truths that he had discovered, to help them understand that the pursuit of power for its own sake would always lead to suffering, but that true fulfillment came from living in alignment with the natural order. One of the most profound realizations that Sun Wukong had during this time was that the universe, in its infinite complexity, was not a battleground for dominance. The forces of nature, the gods, the mortals, every being had its place in the cosmic order, and each had a role to play. No one being, no matter how powerful, could exist in isolation. To live in harmony with the Tao was to acknowledge this interconnectedness, to understand that every action had a ripple effect, and that every being, from the smallest insect to the greatest god, contributed to the balance of the universe. Sun Wukong began to see that his rebellion had been an attempt to impose his will on the world, to assert his dominance over a system he had not fully understood. And in doing so, he had disrupted the very balance he had been seeking to find. This insight led Sun Wukong to embrace a deeper level of humility. He understood now that his actions, while driven by a desire for justice and recognition, had ultimately caused harm not just to the gods, but to the very world he had sought to protect. The natural order of the universe had been disrupted, and it was his responsibility, as a guardian of the Tao, to restore that balance. But this could not be done through force or through the assertion of his will. It could only be done through wisdom, patience, and a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. Over time, Sun Wukong's role as a guardian of the Tao grew more complex. He was no longer just a figure who mediated between the gods and mortals, but someone who also worked to maintain the balance between all the forces of the universe. His interactions with both celestial beings and mortals became a reflection of his inner journey. Each encounter was an opportunity to apply the lessons he had learned and to help others find their own path to understanding. He began to see that true wisdom was not about imparting knowledge from above, but about guiding others to their own realizations, to help them see the connections between all things, and to understand the importance of living in harmony with the world around them. This shift in perspective also led to a new understanding of power. Sun Wukong had once sought power as a means of achieving recognition and control, but he now understood that power was not something to be wielded, but something to be shared. True power came from the ability to work with others, to help them grow and find their own path. The greatest power, he realized, was the power to bring people together, to help them see the larger picture, and to create a sense of unity and balance in a world that was often divided and chaotic. In this new phase of his existence, Sun Wukong found peace not by defeating his enemies, but by understanding them. His once unyielding sense of defiance had been replaced with a deep sense of compassion and empathy. He no longer sought to challenge the heavens or to assert his dominance over others. Instead, he sought to guide and protect, to help those who had been lost find their way, and to ensure that the balance of the universe was maintained. And yet, even in his newfound peace, Sun Wukong was never far from the lessons of his past. His rebellion had shaped him in ways that he would never fully be able to escape. But rather than seeing it as a stain on his character, he began to view it as a crucial part of his journey, a necessary challenge that had forced him to question everything he thought he knew about power, recognition, and identity. The Monkey King had learned that true greatness lay not in conquering others, but in understanding oneself and one's place within the cosmic order. And in this understanding, he had found not just peace, but a profound sense of purpose. Sun Wukong's role as a guardian of the Tao was not one that could be easily defined. It was not a title or a position. It was a way of being, a constant reminder that the path to wisdom and balance was one that required ongoing self-reflection, humility, and compassion. His journey was far from over, but with each passing day, he moved closer to the ultimate truth, that the greatest strength comes not from conquering the world, but from understanding it. And in this understanding, Sun Wukong found his true power, not in his ability to command the forces of the universe, but in his ability to live in harmony with them. As Sun Wukong continued his role as a guardian of the Tao, the weight of his responsibilities grew more pronounced. No longer the reckless and impulsive figure of the past, the Monkey King had become a symbol of balance, not just for the heavens but for the world at large. Yet, despite his wisdom and newfound peace, the universe itself continued to unfold with its myriad complexities, and Sun Wukong's position within that unfolding remained as delicate and precarious as ever. The Tao, as he had come to understand, was not a static force, but a dynamic one, constantly shifting and evolving. The balance he had worked so hard to restore was not something that could be permanently secured. It had to be tended to, nurtured, and protected, and the task often proved to be more challenging than he had anticipated. At times, Sun Wukong found himself overwhelmed by the vastness of his new role. He was not just a protector of the Tao, but a bridge between countless realms, the celestial, the earthly, and everything in between. Each of these realms had its own set of laws, its own complexities, and its own unique challenges. The gods, with their powers and infinite wisdom, had their own way of seeing the world. The mortals, with their fleeting lives, saw it in a much more immediate and often chaotic way. And the forces of nature, from the smallest insects to the largest storms, followed their own rhythms and patterns, independent of the will of any single being. To maintain the balance of all these realms was no simple task for Sun Wukong. This meant that his work as a guardian often involved mediation, not just between the gods and mortals, but also between forces of nature, between conflicting desires, and between the forces of order and chaos. He had learned that true guardianship was not about controlling everything, but about guiding the various forces to coexist in harmony. It was a subtle art, one that required deep understanding, patience, and an unwavering commitment to the Tao. The balance that he had worked so hard to establish was fragile, and every decision he made, had the potential to ripple out in ways that were impossible to fully predict. This complexity of balance became particularly apparent during the times when Sun Wukong encountered other beings who were similarly struggling with their own desires, ambitions, and misunderstandings of the Tao. He had been transformed by his own rebellion, but there were many others, gods, mortals, and even immortals, who were still caught in their own struggles for power, recognition, and control. Sun Wukong's role was not just to mediate between the realms, but also to help these beings understand that true fulfillment could not be found in domination, but in understanding one's place within the greater whole. One of the most difficult aspects of this was the constant need to engage with beings who had not yet experienced the kind of transformation that he had undergone. Many beings, both divine and mortal, still saw power as something to be seized and controlled. They saw their existence as a battle for supremacy, whether in the courts of heaven, the mortal realm, or the forces of nature itself. Sun Wukong understood this drive all too well. It had been his own drive for centuries. But now, as a guardian, he knew that this pursuit of power would only lead to destruction, both for the individual and for the universe at large. And yet, he also knew that simply telling others this truth would not be enough. They needed to experience it for themselves, to understand it in their own way. This realization came to Sun Wukong during a particularly troubling encounter with a powerful immortal who had long been a part of the celestial court. This immortal, a figure of immense strength and influence, had come to embody the very principles that Sun Wukong had once fought against. He was proud, arrogant, and believed that the key to his power lay in his ability to dominate others. When Sun Wukong confronted him, the immortal scoffed at the Monkey King's message of balance and humility, dismissing it as naive and weak. The immortal believed that the heavens were meant to be ruled by those who were strongest, and he saw Sun Wukong's transformation as a betrayal of that very principle. The clash between Sun Wukong and this immortal was not physical but ideological. Sun Wukong did not seek to force the immortal into submission, but instead tried to show him the futility of his ways. He explained that true strength did not come from domination, but from the ability to harmonize with the universe. The immortal, however, refused to accept this. His belief in the necessity of power and control was too strong, too deeply ingrained in his very nature. For him, the world was a battleground, and only the strongest should prevail. He mocked Sun Wukong's belief in balance, seeing it as a weakness that would only lead to the downfall of the heavens. This encounter was a turning point for Sun Wukong. It reminded him that his transformation, while profound, was not universal. He had learned to see the interconnectedness of all things, to understand the subtle flow of the Tao. But there were still many who did not share this understanding, many who were locked in their own struggles for power, recognition, and control. Sun Wukong realized that his role was not just to protect the balance, but also to help others see the wisdom of the Tao for themselves. It was not enough for him to simply embody the principles of balance and humility. He had to help others discover these truths within themselves. In the days that followed his encounter with the immortal, Sun Wukong spent more time meditating on the nature of power and its role in the universe. He reflected on his own journey and the many lessons he had learned, how his desire for recognition had once blinded him to the true path of wisdom, how his rebellion had been an attempt to assert control over the universe rather than understanding its natural flow. As he meditated, he realized that the key to guiding others toward the Tao was not to confront them head-on with forceful arguments or idealistic principles, but to help them see the deeper truths of the universe for themselves. This realization led Sun Wukong to adopt a new approach in his interactions with the gods, immortals, and mortals alike. Instead of seeking to convince others with his own wisdom, he began to engage with them in a way that encouraged self-reflection. He would not impose his understanding on others, but instead create opportunities for them to see the consequences of their actions, to understand the ripple effect that their choices had on the balance of the universe. He would guide them not by force, but by helping them awaken their own wisdom, their own understanding of the Tao. One of the ways in which Sun Wukong began to foster this self-awareness was through quiet observation. He would watch the actions of others, noting how they interacted with the world and with each other. He would observe their struggles, their desires and their fears, and he would wait for the moment when they were ready to see the deeper truth for themselves. It was a delicate process, one that required great patience and restraint. Sun Wukong knew that he could not rush the journey of others. The path to enlightenment was a personal one, and each being had to walk it at their own pace. Through this method, Sun Wukong found that many of the gods and immortals who had once been skeptical of his transformation began to soften. They saw that he was not simply espousing some abstract philosophy, but living it. They saw the wisdom in his actions, even when his words were few. In time, some began to approach him for guidance, not out of a need for power, but out of a genuine desire to understand the deeper truths of the universe. They began to see that the balance Sun Wukong spoke of was not just an abstract concept, but a practical, living force that could shape their lives and their world. For Sun Wukong, this shift in perspective was deeply satisfying. He had come to understand that true power did not lie in domination, but in the ability to guide others toward greater understanding. He realized that the most profound influence he could have on the universe was not through force or coercion, but through quiet, patient guidance, helping others to see the truth for themselves. And in this realization, he found a new sense of purpose. As his role continued to evolve, Sun Wukong's relationship with the Tao became even more profound. He no longer saw it as something separate from himself, something to be understood intellectually. He had become one with the Tao, living and breathing its principles in every action, every thought. The Tao had become a part of his being, as natural to him as his own breath. And in this oneness with the Tao, Sun Wukong found a deeper peace than he had ever imagined possible. But this peace was not an end, it was a beginning. The Monkey King had learned the greatest lesson of all, that the universe, in all its complexity, was constantly in motion, and that true balance was not something that could ever be permanently secured. It was something that had to be nurtured, attended to, and protected every day. And in this daily practice of balance, Sun Wukong found the true path to enlightenment, not in striving for control, but in surrendering to the flow of the Tao, and in helping others find their own way along the path. The journey was never over, but it was one that Sun Wukong had come to embrace with a sense of quiet wisdom and an unshakable peace. Sun Wukong's role as a guardian of the Tao had gradually evolved into something far more complex than he could have imagined at the outset of his transformation. The lessons he had learned, though profound, had never been simple or easily grasped. They had required him to confront his own deepest fears, his desire for power, and his need for recognition, all of which had shaped the trajectory of his life. The Monkey King, who had once fought tooth and nail for the right to rule the heavens, was now tasked with ensuring that balance was maintained not through force or dominance, but through wisdom, compassion, and a deep understanding of the forces at play within the cosmos. Yet, as time passed, he began to realize that his journey was far from over. The universe, in all its vastness, was in constant motion, and with every shift and change, Sun Wukong found himself continually adapting to the ebb and flow of the Tao. The greatest challenge for Sun Wukong, as he continued to evolve in his role, was not simply understanding the Tao, but embodying it in every aspect of his being. The Tao, as he had come to understand, was not an abstract philosophy, but a living, breathing force that guided every particle of existence. To truly align with the Tao was to be in tune with the natural order of the universe, to flow with it, rather than against it. For someone who had once sought to conquer the heavens and impose his will on the world, this was no easy feat. Sun Wukong had to learn to surrender his desire for control, to let go of the need to dominate, and instead, to flow with the currents of the universe. It was a lesson that required constant vigilance, as the temptations to revert to his old ways were always just beneath the surface. At times, Sun Wukong found himself overwhelmed by the sheer scale of his responsibilities. He had always been a being of immense power, a force of nature in his own right, but now he had to use that power not for self-aggrandizement or personal gain, but for the greater good of the universe. His role was no longer about asserting his strength, but about ensuring that the balance between all realms was maintained. The gods, who had once feared and despised him, now came to him for advice and guidance. The mortals, too, had learned to see him not as a trickster or a threat, but as a protector, a being who could offer wisdom and insight into the mysteries of existence. The forces of nature, which had once been untamed and chaotic, now moved in harmony with his guidance. But this harmony was not something that could be taken for granted. Even now, Sun Wukong found himself encountering beings who were still trapped in their own desires for power, recognition, and control. These beings, whether gods, immortals, or mortals, reminded him of the person he had once been, the person who had rebelled against the heavens in a futile attempt to assert his own will on the universe. And though he had come to understand the futility of this pursuit, he knew that others had to reach that understanding for themselves. His role was not to force his wisdom upon them, but to gently guide them toward their own realizations. It was a process that required patience, subtlety, and the ability to see beyond the surface of their actions to the deeper motivations that drove them. One of the most profound encounters Sun Wukong had during this time was with a powerful celestial being, one who had long been revered as a symbol of strength and authority in the heavens. This being, who had once been a close ally of the Jade Emperor, had fallen into a state of arrogance and pride, believing that the universe itself was meant to bend to his will. His immense power had led him to believe that he was invincible, that no force in the cosmos could stand against him. He sought to impose his own vision of order on the universe, disregarding the natural flow of the Tao in favor of his own desires. When Sun Wukong first encountered this celestial being, he recognized the familiar arrogance and pride that had once defined his own character. He saw in this being the same desire for recognition and control that had driven him to rebel against the heavens in the first place. And yet, despite the similarities, Sun Wukong understood that the only way to guide this being toward the Tao was not through force or confrontation, but through understanding and compassion. He approached the celestial being not as a rival, but as a teacher, someone who had learned the hard lessons of humility and balance, and who could now offer guidance to others who were lost in their own desires. At first, the celestial being was dismissive of Sun Wukong's words. He saw the Monkey King as little more than a former troublemaker, a being who had once sought to overthrow the heavens, and who was now content to serve as a humble guardian of the Tao. The celestial being could not understand how a creature like Sun Wukong could possess the wisdom to guide him. He believed that his own power was sufficient to shape the universe according to his will, and he was unwilling to consider that there might be a higher truth beyond his own perception. But Sun Wukong, ever patient, continued to engage with the celestial being, not through forceful arguments, but through quiet observation. He allowed the being to see the consequences of his actions, the ripples they sent through the fabric of the cosmos. Slowly, the celestial being began to realize that his desire for control had caused more harm than good. His attempts to impose order on the universe had led to chaos, and the balance he sought to create had only been disrupted by his own arrogance. He began to understand that true power did not lie in domination, but in alignment with the natural flow of the Tao. And as this realization dawned on him, he began to soften, to open himself to the wisdom that Sun Wukong had shared. This encounter was a turning point, not just for the celestial being, but for Sun Wukong as well. It reminded him that the journey to enlightenment was not a solitary one. Just as he had been guided by others, he now had the opportunity to guide those who were still lost in their own struggles for power and control. The role of the guardian was not to impose one's wisdom on others, but to help them see the truth for themselves. Sun Wukong had learned that true power lay not in forcing others to submit to one's will, but in creating the conditions for others to recognize their own limitations and potential. This was the essence of the Tao, the ability to guide others without force, to help them understand the natural flow of the universe without trying to control it. As Sun Wukong continued his work as a guardian of the Tao, he found that his relationships with the gods, immortals, and mortals had all shifted. The gods, once fearful of his power, now came to him for counsel, seeking his wisdom on matters of balance and order. The immortals, who had once seen him as a troublemaker, now regarded him with respect and reverence, acknowledging that his journey had led him to a deeper understanding of the universe than they had ever imagined. And the mortals, who had once feared the Monkey King as a dangerous figure, now saw him as a protector, someone who could help them navigate the complexities of life with wisdom and grace. Despite these changes, Sun Wukong never lost sight of the most important lesson he had learned. That true greatness was not found in power or control, but in harmony with the Tao. The journey toward enlightenment was not one of conquest, but one of surrender, a surrender to the natural flow of the universe, to the interconnectedness of all things. It was a lesson that Sun Wukong had struggled with for so long, but one that he had finally come to understand in its deepest form. As the Monkey King continued to serve as a guardian of the Tao, his life became one of quiet wisdom and balance. He no longer sought recognition or power, but instead found fulfillment in the simple act of guiding others toward their own enlightenment. His once fiery ambition had been replaced with a sense of peace, and his once unyielding pride had been tempered by humility. The Tao had become his guide, and in its embrace, he found the true path to fulfillment. And yet, even in this state of peace, Sun Wukong knew that his journey was never truly complete. The Tao, as he had come to understand, was not a destination, but a continuous flow, a constant cycle of growth, transformation, and renewal. There would always be challenges, always be beings who struggled with the same desires and ambitions that had once driven him. But as a guardian of the Tao, he had learned that it was not his job to fix the universe or to force others into submission. His role was to guide, to nurture the balance that was already present, and to help others find their own path to understanding. With this understanding, Sun Wukong embraced his role fully, knowing that his journey was one of continual growth, a journey that would never end, but would always lead him back to the heart of the Tao, where true wisdom, peace, and balance resided. As Sun Wukong's understanding of the Tao deepened, he began to recognize that the Tao was not simply a set of philosophical teachings or abstract principles. It was a living force that permeated every aspect of existence. It could be found in the smallest of details, within the rustling of leaves in the wind, the flowing of rivers, and the movement of the stars across the sky. The Tao was both the stillness and the movement, the beginning and the end. It was not something that could be grasped or controlled, but something to be experienced, something that existed beyond the confines of the mind. This realization marked a significant shift in Sun Wukong's journey, for he had always been a being of immense power, and power, for him, had always meant control. He had to learn to let go of that need for control, and instead embrace the natural ebb and flow of the universe. In the past, Sun Wukong had viewed the universe as something that could be conquered, something that could be bent to his will. His rebellion against the heavens, his quest for immortality, and his desire for recognition had all been driven by the belief that the universe was something to be mastered. But as he had come to understand the Tao, he realized that mastery was not about control, it was about alignment. To be in harmony with the Tao was not to impose one's will on the world, but to surrender to the natural rhythms and forces of existence. The Tao was a dance, a fluid movement between opposites, light and dark, life and death, order and chaos. And to truly align with it, Sun Wukong had to learn to flow with that dance, rather than try to lead it. This was not an easy lesson for the Monkey King, for he had been shaped by a lifetime of conflict, pride, and ambition. The desire to control, to rise above others, had been deeply embedded in his psyche. He had spent so many years fighting against the heavens, proving himself worthy of respect and power, that the idea of surrendering to something greater than himself seemed almost foreign. Yet, as he spent more time meditating on the Tao, he came to see that true strength lay not in domination, but in humility. True power was not about bending the universe to one's will, but about understanding the natural flow of life and aligning oneself with it. As Sun Wukong embraced this understanding, he began to perceive the world in a new light. The heavens, which he had once sought to overthrow, now appeared to him as a reflection of the Tao itself, vast, intricate, and ever-changing. The gods, who had once been his adversaries, now seemed like fellow travelers on the same journey, each one contributing to the greater cosmic order in their own way. Mortals, too, were part of this intricate web of existence, their lives fleeting yet meaningful in their own right. Sun Wukong had once seen them as insignificant, but now he understood that every being, no matter how small or seemingly unimportant, played a crucial role in the balance of the universe. One of the greatest lessons Sun Wukong learned during this time was that the Tao was not something to be sought externally. It had always been within him. His rebellion, his struggles, and his moments of great triumph and failure had all been part of his journey toward this realization. The very power that had once led him to challenge the heavens was now the force that could help him understand the Tao. It was not through suppressing his nature, but through embracing it, that Sun Wukong found peace. His wild energy, his fierce determination, his unyielding will, these were not traits to be discarded, but aspects of his being that could be channeled into a higher purpose. In many ways, Sun Wukong's journey was one of self-acceptance. He had spent so many years trying to prove himself, trying to show the world that he was more than just a monkey, that he had never truly accepted himself. He had been driven by a need for validation, for recognition, and for power. But in the end, it was the acceptance of his own nature that brought him true peace. The Tao taught him that he was not separate from the universe, that he was an integral part of it, just as every leaf, every stone, every star was. He did not need to prove his worth to anyone, not to the gods, not to the mortals, not even to himself. His worth was inherent in his very existence. This understanding of self-acceptance became central to Sun Wukong's role as a guardian of the Tao. He no longer saw his position as a way to attain power or recognition. It was not about being revered or admired. It was about maintaining the balance of the universe and helping others to understand their own place within it. He began to guide others not by imposing his own will upon them, but by helping them recognize their own true nature. Just as he had done, he showed them that they were not separate from the world around them, that they too were part of the great flow of the Tao. Sun Wukong's work as a guide was not limited to the gods and immortals. He also sought to help the mortals, who were often caught up in the chaos of life and the struggle for survival. He understood that the mortal realm was a place of great suffering, where beings were born, lived, and died in the blink of an eye. But he also saw that this impermanence was not something to be feared. It was part of the great cycle of existence, the constant movement between life and death, creation and destruction. In this understanding, Sun Wukong found a deep sense of peace. He had once feared death, had sought immortality to escape its grasp, but now he saw that death was simply another part of the Tao. It was not an end, but a transition, a natural part of the dance of life. Through his guidance, Sun Wukong helped others see that their lives, too, were part of the larger cosmic flow. He taught them that the pursuit of power and recognition was ultimately fruitless, for these were fleeting desires that could never bring true fulfillment. True happiness, he explained, came not from achieving greatness or accumulating wealth, but from understanding one's place in the world and aligning with the natural order. He encouraged mortals to live in harmony with the Tao, to accept the ebb and flow of life, and to embrace the present moment. In many ways, Sun Wukong's work with the mortals was the most fulfilling. He could see their struggles and their desires, their fears and their hopes, and he understood that they were no different from him. They, too, were seeking meaning in a world that often seemed chaotic and unjust. They, too, were struggling to find their place in the vastness of the universe. And just as he had found peace through the Tao, so too could they. As Sun Wukong's understanding of the Tao deepened, he found that his connection to the world around him became stronger. He could feel the pulse of the universe within him, and he understood that every being, every event, every moment was part of the great flow of life. He had once sought to control and manipulate the forces around him, but now he understood that true power lay in surrendering to those forces, in allowing them to guide him rather than trying to bend them to his will. He had learned that the universe was not something to be dominated, but something to be embraced with humility and respect. Through his guidance, Sun Wukong helped others find this same sense of peace. He taught them that the Tao was not an abstract concept, but a living, breathing force that could be experienced in every moment. He showed them that true greatness was not about asserting one's will over others, but about understanding the natural flow of existence and aligning with it. And in this understanding, he found the true meaning of his life, not in power or recognition, but in the quiet wisdom of knowing one's place in the world and the ability to help others find their way. As the years passed, Sun Wukong's role as a guardian of the Tao became more important than ever. The world, in all its complexity, was in constant motion, and the balance he had worked so hard to establish was always at risk of being disrupted. But Sun Wukong was no longer the fiery rebel who had once sought to challenge the heavens. He was a being at peace with himself and with the universe. And it was this peace that allowed him to continue his work as a guide, a protector, and a teacher. The Tao, which had once been a distant concept, had become a living force within him. And in its embrace, he found the true path to fulfillment. The Sun Wukong's journey was far from over. The Tao was not a destination, but a continuous flow. And as long as he lived, he would continue to learn, to grow, and to help others along the way. He had learned that the greatest strength lay not in the ability to control the world, but in the ability to understand it, to embrace it, and to live in harmony with it. And as he walked the path of the Tao, he found a peace that transcended all ambition, all desire, and all fear. It was a peace that came from knowing that the universe, in all its vastness, was as it should be, and that his place within it, though humble, was no less important than the heavens themselves.